Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Maaser Sheni. We are up to Perik Gimel Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilun Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvetlana Aranbai, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden. Amen. We know once Maaser Sheni produce enters Yerushalayim, it may not be redeemed for money, but it must be eaten in Yerushalayim. That was yesterday's Mishnah and the previous Mishnah. Today's Mishnah discusses what happens when produce from which Maaser Sheni was not yet separated is brought into Yerushalayim. Perot shenigmera melachtan, the Mishnah says untithed produce that was fully processed, meaning it reached the stage at which it becomes obligated in Maaserot, and we know produce is not obligated in Maaserot until it reaches the stage where it's considered fully processed. We spoke about this in Masechet Maaserot, chapter 1, Mishnayot 5 to 8. Ve'avru b'toch Yerushalayim, and it passed through Yerushalayim after it was taken out of the city. Its Maaserot, including the Maaser Sheni, were separated. Yachazor Maaser Sheni shalahen v'yachel b'Yerushalayim. Its Maaser Sheni must be brought back and eaten in Yerushalayim, because even though the Maaser Sheni had not yet been separated when the produce passed through Yerushalayim, this Maaser Sheni is considered to have already been in Yerushalayim, and accordingly it may not be redeemed and must be itself be eaten in Yerushalayim. And the Mefarshim explain this is based on the general principle that with regards to certain laws we consider tithes that will be separated as though they were already separated, that we call matanot shelo hurmu kimish hurmu domyan. Therefore, although this Maaser Sheni was never actually in Yerushalayim, for when the produce was in Yerushalayim, none of it had actually been designated as Maaser Sheni, it's nevertheless considered as though the Maaser Sheni was separated, and therefore the Maaser Sheni entered Yerushalayim. And the Mefarshim explain, in fact, since we view this produce as containing Maaser Sheni, it's forbidden to take the produce outside of Yerushalayim in the first place, just like you can't take Maaser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim once it was brought into the city. But our Mishnah is referring to a case where the produce was removed from Yerushalayim unlawfully. Now it's telling you, you must bring it back and eat it in Yerushalayim. V'shelo nigmera melachtan, however, regarding produce that was not yet fully processed, saleh anavim lagat v'saleh tenim lamuktzeh, such as a basket of grapes headed for the wine press, or baskets of figs headed for the drying area. And the Mefarshim explain these are considered unprocessed because more work will still be done to them, meaning the grapes will be pressed into wine and the figs will be dried, therefore they're not yet obligated in Maaserot. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, Yachazor Maaser Sheni Shalem v'yachel b'Yerushalayim. Its Maaser Sheni must be returned and eaten in Yerushalayim, just like with produce that passed through Yerushalayim after it was processed. Bet Hillel Omrim, but Bet Hillel say, Yipadeh v'yachel b'chol makom. It may be redeemed and eaten anywhere, because since when the produce was in Yerushalayim, it was not even obligated in Maaser Sheni. Not that you didn't separate it yet, but it wasn't even obligated in Maaser Sheni yet. It cannot be said that the Maaser Sheni was in Yerushalayim, and therefore it may be redeemed. And the Mefarshim explain, according to Bet Hillel, this principle that we said, that tithes that will be separated are already considered to have been separated, which we said was matanot shelo hurmu kimish hurmu domyan, that applies only once the produce has been processed and therefore becomes obligated in Maaserot. Before it's obligated in Maaserot, the Maaserot are not considered to have been separated, therefore it cannot be said that the Maaser Sheni of this produce was in Yerushalayim, whereas Beit Shammai disagree and they hold that the principle applies even to unprocessed produce. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yossi a different version of the dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Lo nechleku Bet Shammai Bet Hillel al perot shel nigmera melachtan. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel did not disagree about produce that was not fully processed when it passed through Yerushalayim. Sheyipadeh Maaser Sheni shalem v'yachel b'chol makom. They all agree that in that case, its Maaser Sheni may be redeemed and eaten anywhere, because according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, everyone agrees that the unseparated tithes of unprocessed produce are not considered as though they were already separated. Therefore, if produce passed through Yerushalayim before it was processed, the Maaser Sheni that is later separated from that produce is not considered to have been in Yerushalayim. The machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, is whether the unseparated tithes of finished produce are considered to have been separated. Bet Shammai hold they are, and Bet Hillel hold they are not. The Mishnah says rather about what did they disagree. Al perot shenigmera melachtan, about produce that was fully processed and then passed through Yerushalayim, which was the Mishnah's first case. Shebet Shammai omrim, Bet Shammai say yachazor maaser sheni Yerushalayim v'yachel b'Yerushalayim. It's maaser sheni must be returned and eaten in Yerushalayim because the maaser sheni is considered to have been in Yerushalayim. Bet Hillel omrim, whereas Bet Hillel say yipadeh v'yachel b'chol makom. The maaser sheni may be redeemed and eaten anywhere. Since the Maaser Sheni was not yet separated when the produce was in Yerushalayim, the Maaser Sheni is not considered to have been in Yerushalayim. And the Rav tells us, Ven halacha ki Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, שלא נחלקו בית שמאי ובית הלל אלא הפירות שנגמר מלאכתן כדברי תנא קמא. Rather, the machloket of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is on unprocessed fruits, like the opinion of the Tana Kama. Now, in this case, it's an exception to the Mishnah's prohibition. Untithed produce of demai, even if it's fully processed, it may enter and leave Yerushalayim, and the Maaser Sheni later taken from it may be redeemed outside of Yerushalayim, because since demai is required to be tithed only as a chumrah d'rabbanan or rabbinic stringency, the halachot are more lenient than of ordinary produce, and it's not subject to this prohibition in this Mishnah. And that is it, Rabotai, Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin now continues. We learned that Maaser Sheni produce may be eaten only inside Yerushalayim and it may be redeemed only outside of Yerushalayim. For these halachot, the borders of Yerushalayim are the walls that surround it. So the Mishnah is going to discuss now the status of trees or buildings that stand partly within the walls of Yerushalayim and partly outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Ilan shu omed bifnim v'notel achutz, a tree that stands inside the walls of Yerushalayim, but its branches extend over the wall of out of Yerushalayim, or med bachutz v'notel ifnim, or a tree that stands outside Yerushalayim's walls, but its branches extend over the wall into Yerushalayim. The halacha is as follows: mikeneged hachoma v'lifnim kilifnim. The part of the tree located from the wall and inward is treated as inside the city. The part of the tree located from the wall and outside is treated as outside the city. Therefore, someone perched on the portion of the tree inside the walls may eat Maaser Sheni, but he may not redeem it, while someone on the part of the tree outside the walls may redeem Maaser Sheni, but may not eat it. The Mefarshim explain the status of both the trunk and the branches are determined by their actual location. The status of the branches does not follow the location of the trunk, nor does the status of the trunk follow the location of the branches. Now, in Masechet Maaser, chapter 3, Mishnah 10, we discussed the same halachot, and it seemingly came out to a different conclusion. If you remember, this the Mefarshim deal with the Tosfot Yom Tov and the Derech Emunah and Erchot Maaser Sheni, chapter 2, number 15. Now, the Mishnah brings now a machloket about a similar case, a chamber that is built into the wall of Yerushalayim, so that part is within the city and part is outside of it. Batei abadim shepitchen lifnim v'chalan lachutz. Olive presses, which are chambers where olives are crushed into oil, that are built into the walls of Yerushalayim. Their entrances are on the inside of the wall, inside the city, but their interior spaces extend outside the wall. O shepitchen lachutz v'chalalan lifnim, or their entrances are to the outside of the wall, but their interior spaces extend inside the wall. And the Mefarshim explain it was common to set up olive presses in rooms built into the city walls. Sometimes the entrance was inside the city, and sometimes it was outside. The rooms would often extend past the wall and protrude from the other side, either into or out of the city. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, Kol Kilifnim, the entire room, even the part that is outside the city walls, is treated as if it were inside the city. So as long as part of the press is inside the city, or the entrance is inside the city walls, the entire press is considered part of the city, and Maaser Sheni may be eaten but not redeemed there. Bet Hillel Omrim, but Bet Hillel say, Mikeneged hachoma v'lifnim kilifnim, the section of the press located from the wall and inward is treated as inside the city. Mikeneged hachoma v'lachutz kelachutz, the section of the press located from the walls and outward is treated as outside the city. Therefore, someone standing in the part of the press that lies within the city walls may eat Maaser Sheni but may not redeem it. while someone standing in the part of the press that lies outside the city walls may redeem Maaser Sheni, but not eat it. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.